Alrighty, so it looks like we still have some folks joining, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to everybody. This is our very first bootcamp session of the Run on Less Electric Depot series. My name is Rachel Ellenberger, and I am the Industry Engagement Manager for the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. Stefan, if you can move to the next slide, please. So this is the first of 10 sessions that NACFE and RMI are hosting throughout the summer, covering all aspects of fleet depot electrification. For those of you planning to join us on our journey here, here are the dates of our next sessions coming up. This information is also available online for those interested. Next slide, please. And before I introduce our moderator and our great panel of speakers today, I would just like to turn this over to our Executive Director, Mike Roth, for an update on run planning.
Hello, everybody. Boy, exciting week for us. I'm really looking forward to Run on Less Electric Depot. I mean, this is our fourth run here. We're looking at how fleets and the industry are scaling electric trucks at single depots. So I'm just really thrilled. And kicking it off here with the first is a really important subject around utilities and fleets and their relationship that's growing. Just last week we called it peanut butter and chocolate, right? So maybe it's showing my age and our age a little bit, but those are two things that need to go together, and we're going to look back and say, wow, what a combination as we begin scaling. Tomorrow, we announce the 8 participating depots in Run on Less Electric Depot. So very excited to share with you these 8 leading fleets that have decided that have the requirement to be involved in the depot, and then secondly, to commit to do it, share their learnings and the learnings of their teams, whether it's the truck builders, the infrastructure suppliers, the utilities, really everybody making this happen. So look for that announcement tomorrow afternoon. And join us for many more of these boot camps. I'll be giving you some updates every 2 weeks during these boot camp series on our planning, maybe some behind the scenes view of our visits coming up in June and July, and then all on through the run in September. So back to you, Rachel. Thanks. Everybody enjoy the webinar.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. So a few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. Stefan, if you can move to the next slide, thank you. We just want to thank our session sponsor, the Environmental Defense Fund, for this session. We are so appreciative of your ongoing support for our program. Next slide. And so this year, similarly to last year, if you would like to test your knowledge and work toward earning your Run on Less Electric Depot badge, you can take the quiz that will be available this week after the session. We posed a question to our moderators to send in some quiz questions that folks can test their knowledge with. So if you're interested, feel free to stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. A few last pieces before we get started. So reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available online for access throughout the week. If you didn't get a chance to submit a question on the registration form that you filled out when you got started here and would like to submit a question to our panelists, please use the Q&A controls in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And if you run into any technical issues, please reach out to Stefan. He is on the call here today and would be happy to help. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Stefan, next slide, please. I'd like to introduce our moderator. Ari Khan is the Carbon-Free Transportation Manager at RMI, who will be leading the discussion today, and will tee up our group of panelists to introduce themselves as well. Ari.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. I'm really excited and appreciative that NACFE gave me the opportunity to talk with these excellent panelists who are going to introduce themselves now. I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer to describe a little bit about herself and then Encore.
Sure, thank you so much, Ari. Thank you for having me. My name is Jennifer Deaton. I'm the Manager of Corporate Strategy and Electrification at Encore Electric Delivery, headquartered in Dallas, Texas. Encore operates the largest electric transmission and distribution company in the state of Texas. We serve more than 13 million Texans across 98 counties, and we own more than 141,000 miles of transmission and distribution lines. Next slide, please. So Encore is kicking off our first ever fleet electrification program called Evolution. We are working to prepare for the impact of fleet electrification in our service territory. We are just now beginning our journey in developing a department around fleet electrification. So some of the things that we are looking to accomplish with Evolution are things like, what does fleet electrification look like for the Encore service territory in the coming years? And how do we, as the utility, prepare for the potential load growth that this could bring? And also, more importantly, how do we communicate processes and best practices, procedures, and things like that to our fleet customers so that they can make the best business decisions through a partnership with the utility? And then also, how do we streamline our internal processes to make sure that the customer has the best experience, but we also tailor our internal processes to this unique customer? So the solution is Evolution. We have created a customer education and outreach partnership program to bring the fleets into the utility and really partner with them as early as we can so that the fleet can make a very educated business decision through the partnership with the utility. We also are working on doing some modeling and some forecasting to help us understand what load growth and forecasts look like on our service territory over the next 10, 15, and 20 years. Thank you so much for having me.
Stefan, can you move to the next slide, please? Paul, I think you're on mute.
Best way to start, right? Thanks, Ari. Thanks, NACFE, and everybody for having me on this panel, and looking forward to an interesting dialogue here. My name is Paul Dupas, founder, CEO of Zeem Solutions. We are what we call a fleet as a service business, which means that we acquire a fleet of commercial electric vehicles, everything from Class 2B all the way up to Class 8. We turn around, we offer a bundled package to our customers, which includes all the services you see below: fully charged vehicle every single day, personal vehicle parking, supervised overnight parking, service maintenance, vehicle wash, all for one bundled monthly price. We are a depot-based solution. We're mainly focused on ports, airports, and distribution centers. This is where most of the activity is happening for fleets that are operating 200 miles or less. As I mentioned, we're bundling the offering in order to try to match or to beat the total cost of operation of a diesel by pulling together the vehicle and buying in volume, putting large-scale infrastructure. Right now, we operate out of near LAX, and we have taken advantage of the Southern Cal Edison Make Ready and Charge Ready Transportation program. And right now, we are currently operating vehicles out of that site below the cost of a diesel. If we can go to the next slide. Right now, our operations, we have a 3.1 acre facility that's about 1.5 miles away from LAX. We're currently right now sitting with a fleet of nearly 100 different vehicles, 8 different OEMs on the site. We are also charging vehicles, passenger vehicles of every single variety that's out there. We currently have 15 DC fast charge ports that are live today, and 6 level 2 chargers. But we're currently going through the largest commercial EV installation in the United States right now, where we're going to have 81 DC fast charge ports, and we'll have an excess of 50 AC charging ports. We currently have a 10 megawatt interconnection with Southern Cal Edison right now, and we've been operating with commercial electric vehicles out of our site since December 2021. So looking forward to, again, a constructive and informational session here.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ari. Thank you, RMI, NACFE, for having me on this panel and allowing me to introduce Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Transfer Program. So what I am, my name is Ramiro Lepe. I'm the Senior Advisor on Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Transfer Program. But before we get into that, a little bit about me. So I happen to come from the transportation industry. I'm a product of trucking. So in other words, fleets, I understand your operations, I understand your challenges. And ultimately what I do at Edison is I help fleets that are in that beginning stage of the transition, really trying to figure out which pathway is the right one for an organization to ultimately lower that cost of the transition and assist them in actually achieving their electrification initiatives. Please go to the next slide. So charge ready transport. So what is charge ready transport? In short, what it is, it's a low to no cost EV infrastructure installation program with tons of bells and whistles that does include pretty much all the utility site upgrades that a site will need in order to transition to electric. So everything from distribution, all the way up into the meter. And then we give a customer 2 distinct tracks on their side of the meter infrastructure. One is an SCE built infrastructure option where we go all the way out to the first point of interconnection between the charger and the physical infrastructure. And then we have a customer built option that supports, any kind of distributed energy resource such as solar, battery integration, etc., through an up to 80% project cost rebate that we do a lot through the program. Now, there are also charger hardware rebates that range from $1,700 up to $37,000 per physical charger for qualifying customers. The project itself would be a sub-meter project with its own special EV rates and demand charge holidays. And then, of course, we also offer advisory service. So think of anybody that's in the very early stages of the transition that just really wants to figure out what the cost of electricity would be like, what the feasibility of the project would look like. These are elements that we could assist through an EV readiness study program. And then we do also offer grant assistance programs for state programs such as Carl Moyer or the Volkswagen mitigation program. So they're happy to be here and looking forward to this exciting discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ramiro. Let's see, we're having some technical difficulties, but Ken, you'll let us know if it's working for you. No,
there we go.
Try it.
Yeah, I just tried. Yeah, can you hear me, Ari?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and, well, I guess let me give you a quick introduction of myself. Yeah, so I'm Ken Marco. I'm currently the Fleet Sustainability Manager for US Foods. And what that means is I am working closely with utilities like Ramiro and others to help add electric vehicles to different sites. And I'll talk about one of our projects here in a minute, but I've been in the industry for over 25 years. I was project manager for a large sustainability project in California that included electric vehicles, charging stations, battery storage, solar, and a full conversion from 100% diesel to 100% alternative fuel vehicles. So it was pretty exciting, and it was actually the first commercial installation of Tesla semi-charging stations even. And then in addition to that, I'm very active with the TMC and was past Sustainability and Environmental Technology Study Group Chair. And looking forward to the discussion today, but if you could just, yeah, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So yeah, a little bit more about US Foods. So some of the things that we're looking at is our overall organization. We've got a sustainability goal that is targeted at reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the corporation by 32.5% by the year 2032. And as a company, we've got over 70 distribution centers across the country with over 40,000 vehicles. So lots of opportunities to make an impact, and lots of opportunities to evaluate different technologies to be able to improve our emissions and carbon footprint as well. I've currently got a project underway in Southern California, where I'm working with a local utility, and we're adding 30 electric tractors, including the infrastructure and the charging stations, to support those electric tractors, as well as installing a 3 megawatt service in the future. Now, one of the interesting things about this project is, and I wouldn't recommend this for most fleets, but we've actually started taking delivery. We've taken delivery of about 15 of these electric vehicles. However, we haven't finished the infrastructure part of it yet. So one of the things that I would encourage is engage with your utility early and often. The infrastructure is really the long lead time item these days on these types of projects. And so I don't have the infrastructure or the permanent installation in place yet to be able to charge these vehicles and support them. However, I did go out and I purchased some temporary chargers or portable charging stations. So I've had the opportunity to still put the trucks into service. We were able to connect to the grid with those portable chargers and still put the trucks into service so we can start learning. And that's really the focus of this particular project. It's a pilot project for us where we get to learn a lot about what it takes to be successful in implementing these types of projects, because there's a lot of different aspects other than just the infrastructure and the vehicles. It's the whole change management process and training drivers, training technicians. But I think one of the real keys here is just being able to work with the utility company early and engage with them on what to expect for the project, so that you can get the right support, get the designs underway, get the documentation and the planning and permitting underway and in place before you start taking delivery of trucks. But in this case, we did work with the local utility company, and it's part of a Charge Ready program. So it's been a great learning opportunity, and we're working through the details, but learning a lot by being able to put the trucks into service. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ari.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, you're clearly the right person for the job, because I would look a lot more stressed if I had trucks without chargers than you do. I applaud you. What's clear to me is that we're having two different industries sort of meet and join for the first time. So I think when you're joining two industries, probably the most important first step is to get to know each other. So Ken and Jennifer, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you like about working in your field. So Jennifer, if you could kick us off and tell us what you like most about working in a utility, and then Ken, you could follow up from the fleet side.
Great.
I think my favorite thing about working in the utility is that, we have such an integral and important part in the economy and in everybody's lives. And we really provide a service, and the work that we do feels meaningful because we really power everyone's lives. And I just leave work every day knowing that, I made a difference in people's lives, and then the work that we do really affects everyone.
Yeah. And I'd mirror that as well. I think this is a great industry. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, and transportation industry is great because it's the backbone of the country, and it's how we deliver goods to the market. But it's great to be able to be part of a transformation of that particular industry, where we are looking at different technologies that are going to be able to help improve our air quality and the environment and the air that we breathe, not only now, but for generations in the future as well. So it's great to be part of that. I think a couple other quick notes. There's just, this industry is great because technology is evolving so rapidly right now, and it's fun to be part of that transformation and be part of that transition and the evolving technology, to be able to address some of the challenging issues that are coming at us from an industry perspective. With the regulations, we've got corporate sustainability goals, we've got a wide range of technologies to evaluate and understand how they're going to fit into our applications, and realizing that there's just no silver bullet that's going to meet all application requirements. There's just a lot of different solutions to be able to evaluate and consider. Hey, Ari, one other quick note, is one of the things when I started the project up in Northern California, we, from a utility engagement, we invited the utility company to come out and be part of a kickoff meeting before we ever broke ground, before we ever started the whole process. We just brought them out and engaged with them so they could be part of the process, become one of a key stakeholder, and shared the vision of what the project was going to be. That here's what we want to accomplish. It was a 3-year plus type project, but we engaged with them at regular times along the way, just so they could understand what the vision was and what to expect, and they could incorporate that into their planning process as well. Because there's a big implication from their perspective also. But I think the other side of it too is just, and something I would encourage for most fleets to consider, is that when you're starting some of these projects, don't just think about phase one of what that project's going to look like. That's going to be 30 trucks. You also have to talk to the utility company about what the long-term view looks like, and that, hey, it's 30 trucks today, but in 4 to 5 years, we really want it to be closer to 75 or 100 trucks, so that they understand what that big picture and long-term view look like as well.
Great, thanks, Ken. It's interesting to hear how the trucking and utility industries have sort of shared motivations in a way that might not have been true 20 years ago, right? So dealing with innovation and also sort of being able to create better air quality in their communities. So, it's interesting. You can see them merging. An electric truck job looks different depending on what side of the fence you're on. If you're on the customer side, in this case, a fleet building a depot versus if you're on the utility side. So Ken and Ramiro, I'm wondering if you could share what you think the key milestones are for an electric truck job from your point of view, and then we can kind of see how they, the shared milestones and the ones that are sort of specific to you. Ramiro, would you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's such a great question. Well, I can tell you, every utility organization out there is going to say the same words: engage with utility early, engage with us often, right? You hear it all the time. But for fleet operators, what does that really mean? Is it just calling the 800 number saying, hey, utility, I'm going to deploy electric vehicles? There goes more into that. So when we talk about milestone, we really want to look at site-specific fleet acquisition plan. To the point made earlier, we want to see what you're not just doing ultimately like in the 2-year deployment, but what does a strategy look like 10 years down the line? Now, in some cases, the fleet might not know that, right? But we could look at potential regulatory indicators. We could look at the useful life left of a vehicle, ESG goals, and really trying to determine what does that fleet acquisition look like. At least give us an estimate. Out of that, the biggest question is site-specific grid capacity. So for example, if a customer is looking to deploy 100 trucks in one site today, it's likely that we probably don't have the power to support all 100 vehicles today, right? But over time, we can look at a strategy where we can phase in power over time. So ultimately, what we're looking for when we talk to a customer, and I think the milestone is getting a fleet to really have a solidified plan. So knowing what their EV acquisition plan does look like, make, model, type, energy requirement, a specific model, and when it's actually arriving, within that 2 to 10 year scope. And then we look at chargers. So we want to know make, model, in kilowatts. So now we're actually forming the project. We're saying, okay, here's how many vehicles, here's an operational profile, here's a kilowatt of chargers that are going to be going to the site, and hence here's our energy capacity. And then the other element is going to be a site map, right? So fleet operators today, what they have to do is they have to figure out, where in their facility does installing charging stations make sense. And you have to take into account current infrastructure where that's placed at, outside of the fence line, for example. You got to look at scenarios like, safety, throughput, sizing. Is it going to be a charging bay? Is it going to be parallel? Are they going to be pulling in? Is it going to be at a 45-degree angle? I mean, there's so many implications that a fleet operator has to consider now in terms of their size. Now, in the LA basin, I can tell you a lot of these places are very constrained. There's not a lot of spacing. So these are scenarios that have to be taken into consideration up front. And then once you kind of have all that down, is how are you actually going to pay for the project? How are you going to pay for these electric vehicles? Are you using state grants of some sort? Are you going to be doing an HVIP program? What's that acquisition strategy look like? And have you talked to your OEM and dealer to determine how much down payment you're going to need to support that, and the financing aspect and the insurance aspect, right? So that's another element, but that helps us because the last thing we want to do is get halfway through a project, we're about to go into final design, and then a customer doesn't have the money to be able to pay for these vehicles. Right, so having that up front is crucial. And then on the other angle is you got to figure out from a utility perspective what programs or tariffs are out there that are able to support your project. So for example, SC, we have various pathways. So we really want to see what which pathways would be the best one for the customer. And all of our pathways, and most utilities, I would probably say that do have the same. There's program participation agreements, and there are also easements that are required. And in most utilities like ours, there's no red line revisions allowed on either of those two documents. So once again, it's making sure that the fleet operator understands this. And if they're leasing a site, that we also get the property owner or property management company involved up front, right? So that way we set them up for success. So now what we did is we determined what their plans are, how they're going to pay for them, where they're going to install them. And ultimately that helps us build a design project. So I think in the beginning stage of it, these are all elements that are crucial because now it lets the utility company know how to move forward from that point going forward, which I would think is definitely very important. So Ken, I'm not sure how you feel about my statements. If any that resonates with you.
Yeah, you covered everything, Ramiro. I would just mirror that. I think what Ramiro said is, and I'm going to start it like at the beginning, even before you start the planning. You got to really establish a vision. You got to understand what are you trying to achieve. What's your goal? And I'll share again. For US Foods, it was we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 32.5%, and that's really what starts the journey. Because now you've got a target. Now you understand what you're trying to achieve, rather than just introducing or adding electric vehicles into your fleet. And so that really drives a lot of the other discussions when you start thinking about some of the things that Ramiro was talking about. When you start having those conversations with management teams about how to capitalize this, how are we going to pay for this, how fast are we going to implement electric vehicles, how, what's the scale going to look like? But along with that, exactly what Ramiro was saying is, I think from my perspective, it's plan to spend a lot of time dealing with that strategy and planning aspect of the overall program to understand what is that vision and what's that going to look like in 10 years or whatever timeline's established. I think the other thing is just make sure you understand what the technology is out there from a fleet perspective. There's a lot of different technologies, there's a lot of different vehicles, and you got to understand what your duty cycle is, what your range requirements are, what your payload requirements are. Those details are important when you're evaluating different technologies to understand which vehicles are going to be appropriate for this particular application and which vehicles are going to have the range capability to be able to support that industry. How heavy are those vehicles, and is that going to compromise payload capacity of those vehicles? So it's important to understand those different details. The other part of this that I would recommend is plan for the change management process. This is a very transformative change for a lot of sites or locations and fleets, and you got to make sure that you're prepared to deal with the drivers and others. But like Ramiro said, when you start looking at different locations for charging stations, that's part of that whole planning process, and that's where that change management factor comes in. When you're working with the site team and you start talking to them about the plans and how this is going to affect them, and working with the utility company to figure out how much power are you going to bring in, where are you going to locate those charging stations. I had one project where we had identified a location where we were going to put the charging stations, and then all of a sudden there was a change at the site and they decided to expand the facilities, and all of a sudden the space we were going to put the charging stations in was going to get taken up by building expansion. So we had to make an adjustment. We had to make some changes to the initial plans that were pretty close to permitting phase, but we had to take a step back and readjust and then keep moving forward. But I would encourage people, you've got to be flexible and you got to be adaptable in these kind of projects because there's a lot of different variables involved. And but certainly the utility company can help walk you through this process. And again, very important to work with them early. The one other point that I would encourage here is that, and something to plan for and work very closely with your utility company is on their rate programs, because this is something that's going to be very critical to be able to have a total cost of ownership. Understand the utility rates, understand whether they've got EV rate programs or commercial type programs that can help you and all, because there are things called time of use rates, and there's demand charges that can implement or impact the overall energy costs at a particular site. But got to work, you need to work with utilities on whether battery storage is appropriate for the site and if that can help with peak shaving or demand charge management. But the overall energy management is a real critical aspect of this, and understanding that along with the amount of data that you're going to be dealing with to be able to make sure that you can achieve a good total cost of ownership. And again, working with the utility company can help there.
What I hear you guys saying a lot is, smooth is fast, and you can't stress enough how important it is to sort of get together early and make everybody know, and make sure that you're on the same page with your partner. I guess Ken, you shared a kind of an interesting morsel there, which was, you planned and then, your supervisor laughed and changed the plan on you. So how did, I guess I'd be interested from both Ken and Ramiro's perspective, what do you do in a situation like that where, you've agreed to a plan, you're, moving toward a sort of a milestone of, let's say, installation in this case, and then you have to change. So, what's like so can you share that on the, fleet side? What did you do? And then Ramiro, are there comparable things that happen on the grid side? And then what do you do?
Yeah, we just had to go back to the drawing board, and a lot of this planning is very site specific, and some sites you've got plenty of space, some sites you don't. I've run into both, where you've got a lot of tight space restrictions and all. And in that particular case, where we were planning to put the charging stations. As I mentioned, it was going to be occupied by some other facilities in within a couple of years. And so we just had to go back to the drawing board and take a look at the site and say, okay, well, rather than putting the charging stations here, what are the other options? And we looked at several different options and did some, laid it out with, here's the pluses and minuses of each of the different alternatives, and finally settled on a solution, and then started working with the utility company and implemented it, and ended up being very successful. It worked out better because it put us closer to the road. One of the challenges for us was trying to get drivers closer to like where they normally would take breaks and all. So it gave them a little bit longer walk, but it was closer to the road where we actually had better access to the utilities and so on. So it ended up being a positive, and long term it was a better solution. So.
All right. And Ramiro, what about you? Have there been any project curveballs that you've then had to share with your, fleet partner, and how did you handle them?
Yeah, guys, the first thing that comes to mind is permitting site maps, base maps, existing utility easements that might exist that are not necessarily Edison in this case, right? Your electric utility could be a wet utility or a gas line, right? So a lot of times we do encounter that with our customer. We go through the project, right? We have a scope, we do a job walk, we could get the infrastructure design plan, we sign an agreement, we get to charger selection, and a lot of things could happen at that point. A charger 2.0 with the new bells and whistles, and the lights might come out, and then like, oh, we want this new charger, but it's 5 kilowatts more times 20, 30 chargers. Now we're talking like possible power, issues, right? So a lot of times what we're trying to do is really make sure that we develop the plan and let the customer at some point say, hey, like if you change anything from this point forward, it's going to delay you. I'm not saying you can't do it, but now you're talking 6 months, a year, 2 years, depending on whatever the scenario might be, where now there's a delay. And I see that happen a lot, not so much on the actual charger placement, although that does happen, it definitely does happen. The one I see mostly is on charger selection. That could be for a variety of different reasons. For example, right now, a lot of fleet operators, what they're trying to do is they're trying to recoup investment into the electric vehicles at the same run rate as their ICE vehicles. So what's the natural inclination? If they're running a single shift operation, they might say, well, what if we just throw another route in there, another driver? And in some cases, if you do that, the charger that you might be looking at up front may become obsolete in the terms where it might not be able to charge the vehicle as fast as your operational profile. Or there's going to be new routes or new customers. Those are scenarios that have to be looked at up front. So it's almost like you got to get your crystal ball out and say, in the next 5 to 10 years, where's our operation heading to? And you almost want to try to future-proof that infrastructure as best as possible while right-sizing it, because bigger is not always better, right? So we want to try to get it at that cusp where it's manageable for the customer, it's going to serve the future load and future needs, and ultimately trying to keep them from making that switch after an important milestone, such as a permit, for example, because that has happened in some scenarios, and literally you will go back to the drawing board. At that point, we have to go back to project feasibility study. So once again, it doesn't come down to a matter of like, can we do it? When some scenarios it might be more limited, it's just going to add more time. And the thing that keeps me up at night is knowing that there is electric vehicles, electric assets that are entering our service area where there's no feasible way of how to charge them, right? That is an issue that is prevalent. So the timing aspect of it, and this is something that everybody really has to understand, is that for a utility, the average timeline, mind you, it could differ from utility to utility, but on average for Edison, it is a year to year and a half from date of application to an infrastructure program until the infrastructure is physically in the ground. So now when you're timing the chargers and the vehicles and the deployment strategy, you really got to time it around that scenario. And mind you, in that timeline is that all things go well. In California, there's a lot of environmental scenarios that come up where there might be a special kind of field mouse or something kind of, or you're next to a power plant of some sort, and now you can't build your chargers at the specific station. So environmental mitigation is a big factor in California, and things that have to be considered. So you want to give yourself as much runtime as possible. So what I always stress, when you're at that 2-year marker from actually deploying your first set of initial vehicles, that's a good indicator to call the utility, because that'll give us enough time to scope out the project, see what your plans are, and ultimately try to time it so you have the infrastructure come in, then the charging stations, and then the vehicles, and not the other way around.
That's a great segue, Ramiro, to the next question for all the panelists, which is, what steps do you think are necessary to have a great experience connecting to the electric grid?
I'll take this one. I think that you're going to hear a lot, talk to your utility early and often, and that is extremely sound advice. But one thing to keep in mind is that, especially if you have a nationwide fleet, every utility is going to be very different, especially in how far progressed their fleet programs are. And a lot of that is determined by how prevalent fleet electrification is in their service territory. So, Encore, for example, we're seeing quite a bit of interest in fleet electrification. So we just now in the last year and a half have kicked off our first fleet electrification program. So I think that part of talking to your utility early and often is really learning where the utility is at in their fleet electrification programs, and also how they're regulated. Everybody is regulated a little different, and there are some utilities that can do certain things, and then there are some utilities that cannot do those exact same things. So I think being really educated on that specific utility and where you're trying to electrify, and really kind of understanding, that's part of the partnership, is understanding the utility, understanding the fleet's needs, and then the fleet understanding what parameters that utility is working within. I think that's a really important as you move throughout the country, especially if you have a national fleet. So I think that that's a really key thing when you get told, talk to your utility early and often. You really understand what they're looking at. And I think Ken mentioned a really good point about basically including the utility in your really long-term plans, even if they're a little gray. When you have a utility that maybe is still developing their fleet programs, that information is really important to the utility to be having proactive conversations for regulatory reasons and then legislative reasons. When we're still trying to build this fleet demographic in our service territory, and we're still seeing a ramp up, we're still trying to design EV rates and policies and things like that. So the more information we have from the customers about their interest level and what their 5 and 10 and 15-year electrification plans are, the more equipped that utility is to have those really proactive conversations and try to make good EV rates and good legislative initiatives and bills and things like that. So it's really important to, no matter what kind of utility that you're dealing with, to really share your vision for fleet electrification for the the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'll take off on that next here. First of all, I think Jennifer, Ken, and Ramiro did an excellent job explaining a very progressive utility, SCE. We enjoy being in their territory now and have enjoyed the fruits of all their programs. And then Jennifer, who is in a marketplace where they're putting the programs together. We're very much going through this where we have established programs, non-established programs, and then Ken as the fleet manager, making sure, hey, I have to make sure I have X, Y, X vehicles operating by such and such a time. So 3 really great perspectives. I'd like to offer a different perspective coming from the transportation as a service side. Number 1, not to repeat what everybody has said, plan, communicate. If you don't do that, you're not going to get anywhere. You need to know what the utilities are doing. As Jennifer suggested, you should be fluid on what the programs are in those utility territories as you're picking up the phone and communicating with your utility. You need to inject confidence in the utilities because they get a lot of inquiry, and then you have to separate inquiry from seriousness. And that's where I think our business model comes in, and I think is quite impactful. Number 1, we're all in. We're not coming in to, like Ken, electrify a portion of your fleet. What's easier for me, Ken, is I'm coming in to electrify the whole fleet, right? So if I'm coming with that mindset, I know I need a huge amount of power. I know that it is an amount of power that the utility definitely sort of does a double take in the beginning. And what you need to do is, again, communicate clearly. What kind of vehicles? What kind of chargers? What is the duty cycle? If you don't understand these things, you're misleading the utility. That's where the utilities are smart enough to know where somebody is serious. Where are they in the electrification spectrum? Are they ready? Are they early? Or are they ready to start to get moving? What I would love to explain to the group, and Ramiro, I think you did an excellent job, 12 to 18 months, even 24 months is probably the likelihood. I'm proud to say we did a make ready and charge ready application with SCE, had steel in the ground and the chargers commissioned in under 12 months. And we did that because we communicated fluidly. We knew exactly what we were trying to do. So the point is, make sure you actually understand what you're trying to do. Fleets, Ken, I take my hat off because you've had to learn electrification, power electronics, charging, and then try to make the right decisions for a massive company that's going to influence the rest of the United States. So I think that I take my hat off because that's a big challenge, and many in your position would not take that on because it's hard. It's the one thing I'll say, sitting on this side, it's very hard. But I think that you really need to communicate, you need to trust your utility, and you need to realize that it's not rinse, repeat. Everything we do in SCE is going to be different in PG&E, is going to be different in PSE&G and Con Ed, and so on and so forth.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Paul. When I started the initial project, I thought, all utilities are the same and we can work with all utilities the same way. But it turns out every project in every different location has a different utility company as well. So, and I think it's just like you said, early and often engagement with the utility company, but you got to make them a partner in this whole process. You've got to establish a relationship with your utility company and get them to understand what your vision is and get them to buy in to the overall project and help them become a partner in it. Then you're going to be a whole lot more successful going forward as well. You're going to have the ability to pick up the phone and call your contact, and and get some action and all. But you got to establish that partnership early.
Yeah, guys, I'll just tell you guys, even within the same utility, we take a holistic approach to every single project because there's going to be different challenges with every project, even down like permitting and their processes for that particular area having jurisdiction. So I think that knowing that up front, that is, I would say, one of the challenges, especially when you're in a multi-site locations. You really got to learn what everybody's doing, where you're operating business or where you're going to be doing business at. And that does become a challenge. And then learning the utility talk, if you will. I can tell a lot of the utilities today, they're being very progressive. If they don't already have plans, in place or programs in place, they are looking into it at the very least. So I would say that interaction would be key, just because your feedback is valuable. If I know that my customers are having specific issues, believe me, that is going to get heard at the director level within our organization, because we do take customer known plans into how we build programs and into how we strategize for the grid. And these are things that are important where we need that fleet utility interaction, right? I could give you an idea, like we haven't even talked about this, but when we talk about site-specific grid capacity, that's always a question, right? Is there enough power on my site for my project? And we are taking that known plan into that strategy. So if I know that there's a customer that's deploying 100 day cabs over the next 10 years, believe me, my next call is to grid strategists and, hey, this circuit, this is what we're looking at. And these are elements where a lot of utilities would be, I'll just speak for everybody, we're very appreciative of that data, because that ultimately is going to help you in the long term.
Excellent. I feel like this webinar will help me professionally and also personally. I think, communicating is always a good idea. So I'll take this to heart. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and take a question that we got from the Q&A earlier. And it was about microgrids. We know microgrids have benefits in terms of resiliency, but will they speed up the time or make it easier to get a grid connection if you have a microgrid on site?
Well, guys, I can tell you with microgrids, that's considered what we call the industry a distributed energy resource. And of course, yes, it does add resiliency. So my only question would be on that scenario, it depends on your fleet deployment size. And you're looking at return on investment, what your break-even points are, because these items are pretty costly. And for example, our utility does not cover the cost of any of those particular hard costs. But it's something that we do support through our various pathways, whether it's charge rate transport, which is a program, or our Rule 29 tariff. There's what's called a Rule 21 interconnection agreement that would have to be done. And we do support the integration into grid assets. And I can tell you, there's a lot of industries, like especially in the transit fields, they are looking into that particular technology. But I would say you would have to definitely do your homework to see, make sure that it pencils out and it makes sense for your particular deployment.
Yeah, and how I would respond to that, I think, ultimately we talked about planning and communicating with the utility. I think the microgrid piece, for example, what we do has to be communicated with the utility in advance. And I don't think it's something that, it's the cart before the horse. You need to have your interconnection point to really have a proper, in my opinion, microgrid opportunity, unless you have some sort of independent resource to be able to pull in the power, solar, some sort of other resource. So I think when it comes to at least how we view microgrid and how we approach it, you need to have your full interconnection in and communicate with the utility your intention of battery storage or any other distributed energy resource that you have planned out of that site.
I think from a fleet perspective, there's one thing I would throw out there as well. When you start planning for a microgrid, it's a much larger project than just adding electric vehicles and infrastructure to support the charging of those vehicles as well. Now you're talking about distributed energy, whether you're going to do solar, battery storage, a lot of other things. So I think the timeline could be a little bit longer than a typical project. But again, it really comes down to doing a site assessment and understanding your duty cycle and what do you really need, and what kind of resiliency do you need, and so on. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis type of an assessment. But certainly there's going to be an opportunity there. I think the other part of it is just understanding the overall economics of it as well, and making sure you understand what the costs of all the different elements of establishing a microgrid look like, and what that can do to contribute to your operational costs or cost savings, I should say.
Okay, so it sounds like microgrids have value, but it's not, generally speaking, it's not necessarily in making a grid connection faster or easier.
No, I think from a fleet perspective, I think, there's a lot of other considerations, just the overall capitalization, or how are you going to capitalize it, and what's the overall impact to the operation? Because I think there's definitely benefits to it, and being able to have the resiliency and all, and having the ability to generate energy on site to be able to support charging and hopefully achieve some lower overall energy costs. But it's a much different challenge than just adding charging stations to a site.
Understood. Jennifer, you mentioned something earlier about being mindful of the fact that all utilities are different, or utilities have a lot of differences based on where they are and how they're regulated. I was wondering if you and Ramiro could talk about the differences in the kind of services a fleet could expect when they call their utility for the first time.
Sure, that's a great question. So I'm going to speak from Encore's perspective. Obviously, the services that we are trying to build around fleet electrification really are centered on outreach and education. We really are trying to, we went into distributed energy resources. There's a lot of vested interest in different departments within Encore. And what we're trying to do is take the onus off of the customer to have to navigate a lot of those internal departments on their own, and really bring everything together in one program for our fleet customers, so that we can talk about energy efficiency and DERs and fleet electrification and the grid and capacity. And we can talk about all of those things, in one program. And that is what we're trying to stand up and establish right now. In terms of the way that we are regulated in the ERCOT market, we don't have the ability to incentivize. So we really are trying to create a partnership through education and information, so that the fleet customers that want to electrify in our service territory, they are very well informed about how the processes work, how long the processes take, any type of supply chain issues that we're running into, we can plan for. We really want to make sure that when fleets in our service territory are transitioning, they are very in step with the utility every single step of the way. And that is, that's the service that we're trying to provide.
Yeah, because I can tell you from SCE perspective, we are looking at a lot of also educational outreach opportunities. And what we've done is really try to immerse ourselves in a lot of the experiential marketing, as I call it. So out in Southern California, we do a lot of ride-in drives. So we'll actually have different OEMs bring in vehicles, and customers go down and kick the tires, drive around the block, talk to the OEMs, finance companies, and really just congregate everybody, under one roof, if you will, and people are actually able to experience what it's like actually driving an electric vehicle. One thing is seeing them on TV or seeing them, on your computer screen, and another thing is actually going out there and experiencing them for yourself and actually driving the asset. So that'd be one element. We recently had our very first grant assistance workshop. It was the target market was drayage fleet operators, of course, what's going on with regulations today. And we brought in our partners, Glassine Anderson Associates, and we were essentially doing consultations on the spot and even helping them with that first initial step of the application process for grants such as Volkswagen Mitigation or Carl Moyer. So that was something of great success. Definitely doing a lot of working groups, a lot of education, one-to-one education, a lot of one-to-many education, such as how to choose a correct charger for your application, as an example. That was one that we recently did. But ultimately, programmatically, and as far as like services and different resources a customer could expect when working with Edison, the big question always comes up is how much power is available at my site? And these are elements that we do have a tool. We call it the Distribution Resource External Portal, also known as Dr. PEP. And essentially, a customer can literally put in any address within our service area and find out an estimate, mind you, it is an estimate, as to how much grid capacity is available on the local circuit as well as the substation. So that is something that's been really, really helpful. If a customer wants to go further in the weeds and actually get an analysis done, there is a paid study that they can conduct. It actually gives them the exact capacity at their particular site. So whenever you're looking at investment projects or people relocating or bringing business into our area, those are crucial tools. Now, from a fleet perspective, I know it was mentioned earlier, was rate structures, right? So we do have right now EV-only rate structures. In all of our tariffs or programs, they do have a separate sub-meter specifically for their EV charging initiatives. And what we do is we inject it with time of use, what we call 7, 8, and 9. And there are also demand charge holidays that are associated with the programs as well. So that's an advantage. We do also have a fleet fuel calculator. So a customer can make a lot of inputs and really get the estimate of how much it would cost them versus electricity versus that of fuel or diesel cost. So that is something that is available to you guys. I could drop it in the chat as well because anybody could go in there and check that out. But what's really interesting about our program is the way that our programs are structured. It really helps everybody from that very, very early stage of the process, which would be a program that we call EV Readiness Study. And what an EV Readiness Study will do, mind you, these are all free programs. What they will do is that it'll actually give you a high-level overview of a fleet, a site. It'll answer questions like how much available capacity is at my facility, what kind of grants are available out there, what kind of electric vehicles are available out there, where are we going to place our chargers. And then there's an actual report that actually gets sent out to the customer. And it's about a 3 to 4 week lead time. So it's a great place to start. And then naturally through the progression, there's the question of how we're going to pay for these things. So that's when our grant assistance program kicks in and helps out with programs like Volkswagen Mitigation and Carl Moyer. And then ultimately, once they have that figured out, the question is, okay, well, we know where we're going to place the chargers. We know how we're going to pay for them. How are we going to get the infrastructure in the ground? And that's where our various pathways come in, whether it's Charge Ready Transport that provides that low to no cost EV infrastructure installation program, or Rule 29 tariff, which is the utility set upgrades necessary for EV deployment. So if you look at the way our programs are structured, it really helps everybody from the very early stage, somebody who's barely looking into electrification, wants to just figure out if it's right for them, that'd be EV Readiness Study. And then of course, as the conversation kicks off, the conversation of how we're going to pay for them, we have grant writing assistance. And then ultimately, when we know a customer said, yes, we're going to do this, this makes sense, we're going to move forward with this initiative, we have our 2 electrification pathways. So that's really how our programs are structured in order to help a fleet at any given point in their process.
Wow. Ramiro, did you have these programs 4 years ago, or were they developed in response to market needs that you and your regulators in the state of California identified?
Yeah, great question. I can tell you, Charge Ready Transport started back in 2019. It's a 5-year program, and we did just file a 2-year extension with the CPUC recently, so we're hoping we're going to be able to go through the end of 26. Rule 29 came about, I want to say it was May or June of last year. And our grant assistance program and EV Readiness Study are also about a year and a half old as well. So these are all fairly somewhat newer. We have a couple other programs that are also being developed today, which is a loan loss program, and we also are looking at a DREA's truck rebate. So these are things that hopefully we'll go to market here in the next few months on both those additional programs as well.
All right, thanks for breaking news with us, Ramiro.
Yeah, no problem. You're
down. All right, we are getting into the lightning round portion of our webinar. So I think we just have 2 more questions. One is from the audience. I'm curious, how do you think about megawatt charging? And do you think that we are, is that going to be sort of easily adapted to and a great opportunity, or is this going to be a major grid challenge?
I could take that first. As somebody who's got 180 kilowatt chargers on our lot now, looking for the 350s when they come on. There's only one truck today that takes 350, and it's not even on their trucks yet. So what happens is it's great to hear about megawatt charging, but to know all the challenges right now that we have trying to get power for even level 3 charging at the 100 kilowatt level or 180 kilowatt level, I have to be honest, I don't see it in the very near term. It'll be great to have, but I think the OEMs are still not on board for this as well. The truth about megawatt charging is, it's incredibly fast, and batteries don't love fast charging like that. So I think it's going to take some time to really adopt megawatt charging. Although, I am in the business of throughput and charging by the kilowatt hour. So I would love nothing more than to have vehicles come through my lot, charge fully in a half hour. And I'm not talking about, Chevy Bolts and Teslas. I'm talking about our Kenworth trucks, our Nikola trucks, and every Volvo trucks and so on. Those today, sit at our chargers for 3, 4, 5 hours. So I think megawatt charging is welcome, but I think the challenges we have today with much lower power capacity, I just struggle to see that. I'd be really curious to hear Jennifer and Ramiro's response.
Yeah, I think I'll echo what Paul said. We haven't seen a lot of tangible projects like that come through our service territory just yet. I mean, from a grid perspective, it really flows through the same process that all of our other projects flow through. There's really not a difference in that kind of project versus, any other type of large load added project. It'll flow through, our design and construction as every other large, project does, for example, a data center or something like that we're seeing. My hope is that we'll have a lot of information early for those types of projects when and if they do come.
Yeah, because I think the thing I'll add to that, I mean, these type of projects are going to consider significant amount of time, significant amount of investment, and not all that investment would be necessarily covered by the utility. So that's another thing to consider. So that somebody that's looking to deploy these definitely has to be prepared for that. And I think as far as like systematic spikes, I mean, if you look at like what an MCS charger would potentially do and the amount of constraint it would put on the grid itself, there has to be some sort of distributed energy resource, such as battery storage system, and a curtailment of that peak demand as well at the same time. And then the question is, can the truck even accept it, right? And now we're talking like interoperability of charging connectors is also going to be an issue. And then, I mean, if you put, I don't know, 10,000 trucks on the road in California and everybody's using this type of NCS charger and with limited capability, now the operator itself, they're going to run into this challenge where they're going to have a backlog of trucks, waiting to charge, even though it's 10 minutes a pop. But you figure 10 minutes, even if you have 6 people ahead of you, how long is that going to take, right? I mean, for it to be your turn. So there's going to be a significant amount of downtime. I think reservation systems might be necessary, those kind of scenarios. But it's still, there's still a lot of challenges in regards to that. I think I'll just say that the time frame and the investment costs are the ones that are the most, the ones that stick to mind for me, at least at the moment, for this type of technology.
Okay, great. So it sounds like we should focus on getting to 350 before we start thinking about 1 megawatt. So I appreciate you guys, keeping me realistic and our audience realistic. So we are at time. I'm gonna hand it off now. Thank you guys very much. This was just a really great conversation. I wish we had more time. I want to hand it off to Rachel to sort of give an update and thank our panelists so much for participating.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you everybody so much again. This is going to conclude our very first boot camp session. So thanks to our panelists, to our sponsor, and to everybody for joining us today. Just a reminder to stay tuned for our announcement tomorrow about our participating depots. Another reminder that the recording of this session along with the quiz will be available online after this session this week. So please stay tuned. Be sure to connect with us on social media. All of our handles are here, as you can see. Thank you guys so much again. We will see you in the next session on May 16th. That is going to be moderated by Mike Roth and his panel of experts. We will be discussing grants and incentives in this landscape. So thank you so much again, and we'll see you in the next one.